The horses screamed before Carriage saw them. She was crossing Wyvern Street with a basket of ribbons for her mother's mending shop when the sound split the air. Hooves thundering against cobblestone, wood splintering, a coachman's desperate shout swallowed by chaos. She turned just as the carriage careened around the corner, its team of 4 greys wild-eyed and frothing, reins dragging uselessly along the ground. The coachman was gone. Thrown, probably. Dead, possibly. And the carriage was heading directly toward a cluster of children gathered around a pie seller's cart. Carriage didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her. She dropped her basket and ran, not away from the danger, but toward it. Her worn boots slipped on the wet stones, her pulse slamming through her veins with every stride. The horses bore down, nostrils flaring, muscles straining against harnesses that held them prisoner to a vehicle no one controlled. 3 seconds, maybe less. She lunged for the lead horse's bridle, her fingers closing around leather and brass, just as the animal's shoulder slammed into her chest. The impact drove the air from her lungs, sent stars exploding across her vision. But she held on. Whoa! The word tore from her throat, raw and commanding. Whoa! Steady! Steady now! The horse fought her, neck arching, hooves dancing dangerously close to her feet. But Carriage had grown up around horses, not fine carriage horses like these, but workhorses with tempers twice as foul. She knew the language of frightened animals. She pulled down on the bridle with all her weight, forcing the horse's head toward its chest, breaking its panicked momentum. The second horse followed, then the third and fourth, the whole team shuddering to a halt in a cacophony of snorts and stamping hooves. For a moment, there was only the sound of her own ragged breathing and the pounding of blood in her ears. Then the screaming started. Not the horses this time. People. Voices rising from the gathered crowd. Gasps, shouts, her name being called by someone she couldn't identify through the ringing in her head. "Miss! Miss! Are you injured?" Hands reached for her. She stumbled back from the horse, suddenly aware that her dress was torn at the shoulder, her palms scraped raw and bleeding, her hair tumbling loose from its pins, in a wild mess around her face. "The carriage," she managed. "Is anyone inside? Is anyone?" The carriage door burst open. A man emerged. No, not emerged. Erupted. He moved with the coiled fury of someone who had been helpless and hated every second of it. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in clothes so finely tailored they probably cost more than her family earned in a year. Blood trickled from a cut above his left eyebrow, staining his cravat crimson. His eyes found hers immediately. They were the color of winter frost, pale gray, almost silver, sharp enough to cut. They swept over her with an intensity that made her stomach clench, her ruined dress, her bleeding hands, and her disheveled hair. She felt catalogued, assessed, and filed away in the space of a single heartbeat. "You." His voice was low, clipped, carrying the unmistakable authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "You stopped them." It wasn't a question. "The children," Carriage said, gesturing vaguely toward the pie cart, where the cluster of young ones stood frozen, wide-eyed, very much not crushed beneath carriage wheels. "They would have been killed." "Yes." The man stepped closer, and despite his injury, despite the chaos still swirling around them, he moved with the fluid grace of a predator. "You could have been killed, but I wasn't. By sheer luck. By knowing horses." She squared her shoulders, some spark of defiance cutting through her shock. "Your coachman lost control. The reins were dragging. Someone should have—" "My coachman was thrown when the axle cracked," his mouth pressed thin. "A fact I'm well aware of, thank you." The crowd was pressing closer now. Carriage could hear whispers rising like steam, feel the weight of dozens of stares. A woman in silk pointed openly. A gentleman in a top hat was already scribbling in a notebook. A society columnist, she realized with dawning horror. "That's him," someone hissed. "That's the Duke of Aldridge." Duke. The word crashed through her like ice water. She looked at him again. Really looked. The quality of his coat, the signet ring glinting on his finger, the way the crowd parted around him like water around stone. Not just a wealthy man, not just an aristocrat, a duke. And she had just grabbed his horse's bridle like a common stable hand, torn her dress in front of half of London, and spoken to him as if they were equals. "I should go," she said, already stepping back, searching for an escape route through the thickening crowd. "I'm glad you're unharmed, Your Grace. Truly. But I need to—" "Go where?" His hand caught her elbow, not roughly, but with enough firmness to stop her retreat. "You're bleeding. You're in shock. And you just saved my life in front of approximately 40 witnesses, half of whom are already composing the gossip they'll spread at dinner tonight. That's not my concern. It will be." His grip didn't loosen. "By this evening, every drawing room in London will know your name, your face, and your circumstances. They'll debate whether you're a hero or an opportunist. They'll wonder what you expect in return." Carence's chest tightened. "I don't expect anything." "That," the Duke of Aldridge said, something unreadable in those steel-gray eyes, "is precisely the problem." Before she could respond, a sleek black carriage pulled up beside them, undamaged, freshly arrived, bearing a crest she didn't recognize. A footman leaped down to open the door. "Get in," the Duke said. "I beg your pardon?" "Get in the carriage, Miss Whitmore. Carence Whitmore. Miss Whitmore." His voice softened by exactly 1 degree. "Please, let me at least see to your injuries. You've earned that much, whether you want it or not." Every instinct screamed at her to disappear into the crowd, to return to her mother's shop, to pretend this never happened. But his hand was still on her elbow. The crowd was still watching. And somewhere in the chaos, she'd lost her basket of ribbons. Ribbons they couldn't afford to replace. "Fine," she heard herself say. "But only until my hands are bandaged. Then I'm leaving." The Duke's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Of course," he said smoothly. "Whatever you wish." He helped her into the carriage with unexpected gentleness, and as the door closed behind them, sealing them together in velvet-lined silence, Carence realized with sinking certainty that leaving was going to be far more complicated than she'd imagined. The carriage interior smelled of leather and sandalwood, rich and foreign and suffocating. Carence pressed herself against the seat, acutely aware of how out of place she looked, her torn dress, her bloodied palms, her hair hanging in tangled ropes around her shoulders. Across from her, the Duke of Aldridge sat with unnerving stillness. Blood still trickled from the cut on his brow, but he seemed entirely unconcerned with his own injury. His attention remained fixed on her, with the intensity of a man solving a puzzle. "Your hands," he said. "Show me." "They're fine. They're bleeding. Show me." It wasn't a request. Carence bristled, but she extended her palms anyway, turning them upward so he could see the raw scrapes where the bridle had torn through her gloves and into skin. He leaned forward, and before she could pull back, he'd produced a handkerchief from his pocket, monogrammed, she noticed, with an elaborate A, and was wrapping it around her worst wound with surprising deftness. "You know horses," he said as he worked, "not just riding, handling." "My father was a farrier before he died. I grew up in stables." "That explains the technique. Not many people would think to force a panicked horse's head down. Not many people would be foolish enough to grab a runaway carriage team." His lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. No, they wouldn't. He finished bandaging her hand and sat back, but he didn't release her wrist immediately. His thumb rested against her pulse point, and she knew with mortifying certainty, that he could feel how fast her heart was racing. "Where were you going?" he asked, "before all this?" "Home, to my mother's shop. She does mending and alterations near Crofter's Lane." Crofter's Lane. He repeated it without judgment, but she heard what he didn't say. A poor neighborhood, a working family, a world away from ducal carriages and society gossip. "Yes, well," she pulled her hand free. "Not all of us have estates to manage." "No." His gaze didn't waver. "Not all of you throw yourselves in front of runaway horses to save strangers either." The carriage slowed, then stopped. Carenza glanced out the window and felt her stomach drop. They were not at Crofter's Lane. They were before a house, no, a mansion, of cream-colored stone, with columns flanking a massive front door. Servants were already emerging, faces carefully blank, but eyes sharp with curiosity. "This isn't my home," she said, an edge of panic creeping into her voice. "No, it's mine. Aldridge House. You said you'd see to my injuries. I am. My physician is already being summoned. He'll ensure there's no lasting damage to your hands." The Duke was already rising, reaching for the carriage door. "You can leave after he examines you. You have my word." She didn't believe him. Something about the careful way he moved, the calculated precision of his words, told her that nothing about this was accidental. "Why are you doing this?" He paused, hand on the door handle. "Doing what?" "Bringing me here, tending to me personally. You're a duke. You could have thrown coins at me and driven away." "I could have." He met her eyes. "But you didn't have to save me, Miss Whitmore. You could have watched the carriage crash and felt nothing but mild inconvenience at the disruption to your errands. Instead, you risked your life. So, this is gratitude. This is interest." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning she couldn't quite parse. "I find myself curious about the kind of woman who acts without thinking and negotiates without flinching. I haven't negotiated anything. Yet." He opened the door, and sunlight flooded the carriage. "Come, let's get you cleaned up." Every rational thought demanded she insist on returning to Crofter's Lane immediately. But her hands were throbbing, her head was spinning, and some treacherous part of her wanted to see the inside of that house. Wanted, just for a moment, to exist in a world where her biggest concern wasn't whether they could afford candles this week. The Duke helped her down from the carriage, his grip firm and impersonal. Servants swarmed around them with quiet efficiency, someone taking his bloodied coat, someone else murmuring about sending for the physician, a third pressing a glass of something into her hand before she could protest. "Drink it," the Duke said. "It's only water." She drank, suddenly aware of how parched her throat was. The cool liquid steadied her, cleared some of the fog from her mind. "Your Grace." A woman appeared in the doorway, severe, silver-haired, and dressed in black silk that probably cost more than Carenza's entire wardrobe. Her eyes swept over Carenza with undisguised assessment. "I've been informed there was an accident." An accident and a rescue. The Duke's hand moved to the small of Carenza's back, a gesture that felt strangely proprietary. "Grandmother, may I present Miss Carenza Whitmore? She saved my life this afternoon. Quite dramatically, I'm told." The older woman's expression didn't flicker. "How fortunate. Indeed." The Duke smiled, and for the first time, Carenza saw something dangerous in it. "I've been thinking, actually, about how one repays a debt of that magnitude." Carenza's spine stiffened. "I don't want repayment." "Perhaps not." His voice dropped, meant for her ears alone. "But I'm going to offer it anyway. And Miss Whitmore, I suspect you're going to accept." He was guiding her through the front door before she could protest, into a world she had no business entering. A world, she realized with growing unease, she might not be able to leave. The drawing room of Aldridge House was larger than Carence's entire home. She stood near the fireplace, freshly bandaged hands clasped before her, trying not to stare at the oil paintings lining the walls, portraits of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge her from their gilded frames. A maid had brought tea. The fine china cup felt fragile enough to shatter if she breathed too hard. The Dowager Duchess sat in a high-backed chair like a queen on her throne, watching Carenza with eyes that missed nothing. The Duke stood by the window, his cut now cleaned and dressed, his expression unreadable. No one had spoken for nearly a minute. "So," the Dowager finally said, "you're a farrier's daughter." "Yes, Your Grace. And you stopped my grandson's carriage team with your bare hands." "Yes, Your Grace." "Remarkable." The word held no warmth. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, do you make a habit of throwing yourself into dangerous situations? Or was today a special occasion?" "Grandmother," the Duke said quietly. "A warning. I'm simply curious, Arden. One doesn't often encounter young women with such unconventional instincts." Carenza set down her teacup before her trembling hands could betray her. "There were children in the path of the carriage, Your Grace. I didn't think. I simply acted." "Didn't think." The Dowager's lips pursed. "And yet, here you are, in my drawing room, drinking my tea. One might wonder if thinking has occurred since." "I was brought here against my—" "Oh, don't be tedious." The Dowager waved a dismissive hand. "You could have refused the carriage. You could have demanded to be returned home. You didn't. Which suggests you're either curious or calculating. I haven't yet determined which." The door flew open before Carenza could respond. A young woman burst into the room like a summer storm. Dark-haired, bright-eyed, dressed in a morning gown of pale yellow that made her look like a daffodil come to life. She couldn't have been more than 19, and she vibrated with barely contained excitement. "Arden, I just heard." She flew across the room and threw her arms around the Duke, who accepted the embrace with long-suffering patience. "They said your carriage nearly crashed, that you could have been killed, that a woman saved you." She spun around, spotted Carenza, and gasped. You're her, the one who grabbed the horses." "Tamsin," the Duke said wearily. "Breathe." "I am breathing. I'm breathing, and I'm delighted." Tamsin crossed to Carenza and seized both her bandaged hands, then immediately released them with a wince of sympathy. "Oh, your poor hands. Are you all right? Of course you're all right. You're standing here. But are you really all right?" "I'm fine," Carenza managed, bewildered by the onslaught of warmth. "Truly. She's extraordinary is what she is." Tamsin turned to her brother with shining eyes. "Arden, do you understand what this means? She saved your life, in front of everyone. It's like something from a novel." "Life is not a novel, Tamsin," the Dowager said coolly. "Life should be a novel. Life should be exciting and romantic, and full of unexpected heroes." Tamsin squeezed Carenza's arm. "You're staying for dinner, aren't you? Please say you're staying." "Miss Whitmore has a home to return to," the Dowager interjected. "A mother, I believe. A shop of some kind." "A mending shop," Carenza confirmed. "And yes, I really should. Actually." The Duke's voice cut through the chatter, silencing both his sister and grandmother. "Miss Whitmore, might I speak with you privately?" The Dowager's eyes narrowed. Tamsin's widened with intrigue. Carenza felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. "Whatever you have to say," the Dowager said, "can surely be said before family." "It cannot." The Duke moved toward the door, pausing to look back at Carenza. "Please, just a moment of your time. Then I'll have my driver return you wherever you wish to go." Curiosity, that dangerous, treacherous curiosity, held her captive. "Very well," she said. "One moment." He led her to a smaller room, a study, lined with books and smelling of ink and aged paper. He closed the door behind them, and the click of the latch sounded unnervingly final. "I'll be direct," he said, turning to face her. "I need your help." "My help?" She almost laughed. "Your Grace, I meant dresses for pennies. I don't see how I could possibly. You could pretend to be my fiancé." The words landed like stones in still water. Carriage stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I'm sorry. I could what?" "Pretend to be my fiancé." He said it calmly, as if proposing a business arrangement rather than a complete upheaval of both their lives. For the remainder of the season, perhaps 3 months, no more. "You're mad." "Possibly. But I'm also desperate." He moved to his desk, leaning against it with his arms crossed. "My grandmother has decided I must marry. She's selected a bride. Lady Seraphine Cartwright, daughter of the Earl of Dunmore. The match would be advantageous. It would also be utterly miserable. Then refuse her. I have. Repeatedly. She doesn't listen." A muscle ticked in his cheek. "But you've given me an opportunity, Miss Whitmore. The whole of London just watched you save my life. By tonight, every gossip in the city will know your name. If I were to announce that the heroic Miss Whitmore had captured my heart, that I intended to court her properly, with marriage as my aim, even my grandmother couldn't argue." Carence's head spun. "You want to lie. To everyone. I want to buy time, to choose my own future instead of having it chosen for me." His gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "You'd live here as Tamsin's companion. You'd attend balls and dinners. You'd wear gowns finer than anything you've ever touched. And at the end of the season, we'd part amicably. You'd return to your life with enough money to keep your family comfortable for years. And my reputation? Protected. I give you my word." She wanted to refuse outright, but she thought of her mother, working until her fingers bled, of their cramped rooms above the shop, of the ribbons she'd lost, the ribbons they couldn't afford to replace. "Why me?" she whispered. "You could find a dozen willing women of actual standing." "Because you didn't hesitate." His voice softened. "You saw danger, and you ran toward it. You're brave, Miss Whitmore, foolishly, recklessly brave, and I find myself in need of exactly that kind of courage." She stood at the edge of a precipice, one step forward, and everything changed. "If I agree," she said slowly, "I have conditions." Surprise flickered across his face, or perhaps respect. "Name them," he said. The Duke's eyebrow rose fractionally. "Conditions. You're negotiating with me. You're asking me to upend my entire life for your convenience." Carriage straightened her spine, ignoring the way her bandaged hands throbbed. "That warrants conditions." For a long moment he simply studied her. The firelight caught the sharp planes of his face, the cool silver of his eyes. She couldn't tell if he was annoyed or intrigued. "Very well," he said finally. "What are your terms?" Carriage had been forming them since he'd first spoken, her mind racing even as her heartbeat stuttered. "First, my mother must be told the truth. Not the whole truth. She'd never allow it. But enough. I want her to believe I've secured a position as Lady Tamsin's companion, a respectable reason for my absence. Easily arranged. What else? Second." She met his gaze directly. "When this ends, I don't return to nothing. I want references, real ones, letters of introduction to households who might employ me as a governess or companion. I won't go back to mending torn hems and counting pennies for candles." A shadow crossed his face. "You're thinking beyond the arrangement." "Someone has to. You've offered me a fantasy, Your Grace. 3 months of silk dresses and crystal chandeliers. But fantasies end. When yours does, I need to survive what comes after." He was quiet for a moment, and she wondered if she'd pushed too far. Dukes weren't accustomed to being challenged by farriers' daughters. "Agreed," he said. "I'll ensure you have letters from every notable household I'm connected to, which is most of them. Your third condition." This one was harder. She took a breath. "If you meet someone real, someone you actually want to marry, this ends immediately. No delay, no pretense, no using me as a shield while you conduct a true courtship behind closed doors." Her voice hardened. "I may be poor, Your Grace, but I am not a fool, and I refuse to be made to look like one." The silence stretched between them, sharp as broken glass. Then, slowly, the Duke nodded. "You have my word. All three conditions. Your word." She couldn't quite keep the skepticism from her voice. "Forgive me, but I've learned that words from wealthy men often evaporate when convenient." "Then let me be clear." He stepped closer, near enough that she could smell sandalwood and something darker beneath it. Smoke, perhaps, or the lingering memory of fear from the accident. "I do not make promises I don't intend to keep. It's inefficient and beneath me. If I give you my word, Miss Whitmore, it is ironclad." She searched his face for deception and found none. Only that unsettling intensity, that focused attention that made her feel simultaneously exposed and oddly seen. "Then we have an agreement," she said. "We do." He extended his hand. "Shall we seal it properly?" She hesitated. Ladies didn't shake hands with gentlemen. It wasn't done. But nothing about this situation was proper, so why pretend otherwise? She placed her bandaged hand in his. His grip was warm, firm, careful not to press too hard against her wounds. For a moment, neither of them moved. His thumb brushed across her knuckles, accidentally, surely, and she felt the touch like a spark. "Welcome to Aldrich House, Miss Whitmore," he said quietly. "I hope you don't come to regret this." "So do I," she replied. "For both our sakes." He released her hand just as the study door flew open. Tamsin stood in the doorway, practically bouncing on her heels. "Well, what's happening? You've been in here for ages. Grandmother is threatening to break down the door, which I would pay money to see, honestly." "Miss Whitmore has agreed to stay," the Duke said smoothly, "as your companion for the season." Tamsin's shriek of delight could probably be heard in the servants' quarters. She launched herself at Carriage, enveloping her in an embrace that smelled of rosewater and enthusiasm. "This is wonderful. We're going to be the best of friends. I can already tell." "Oh, there's so much to do. You'll need dresses, proper ones, and we'll have to teach you the dances. And there's the Hatherley ball next week. Tamsin." The Duke's voice held a note of long-suffering patience. "Perhaps let Miss Whitmore breathe before you plan her entire social calendar." Breathing is overrated, but Tamsin released her, beaming. "Come on, I'll show you to your room. It's the blue suite. It has the best view of the gardens, and the bed is sinfully comfortable." Carriage allowed herself to be swept toward the door, glancing back once at the Duke. He stood where she'd left him, watching her go with an expression she couldn't read. Not quite satisfaction, not quite concern. Something in between. "Miss Whitmore," he called, just as she reached the threshold. She paused. "Your Grace?" "For what it's worth. I don't think you'll regret this." She wanted to believe him, against all reason, against every instinct that had kept her safe in a world that didn't favor women like her. She wanted to believe. But trust was a luxury she'd never been able to afford. "We'll see," she said, and let Tamsin pull her into the unknown. The blue suite was not a room. It was a small country. Carriage stood in the center of the bedchamber, turning slowly to take in the enormity of what surrounded her. A four-poster bed, draped in silk the color of a summer sky, windows that stretched nearly floor to ceiling, overlooking gardens so perfectly manicured they looked painted, a writing desk inlaid with mother-of-pearl, a wardrobe large enough to hold the entire contents of her mother's shop with room to spare, and flowers, fresh flowers in crystal vases, their perfume filling the air with sweetness. "Do you like it?" Tamsin hovered in the doorway, watching her reaction with obvious delight. "I told them to put you here specifically. The rose suite is larger, but it gets the afternoon sun directly, and in summer it's absolutely stifling. This one stays cool. It's beautiful. It's yours, for as long as you're here." Tamsin crossed to the bed and flopped onto it with undignified abandon. "I'm so glad you're staying. You have no idea how dull this house has been. Grandmother is constantly planning and scheming. Arden is constantly brooding and avoiding. I've been slowly dying of boredom. Surely you have friends. Other young ladies too. Other young ladies are tedious." Tamsin wrinkled her nose. "All they talk about is marriage prospects and fashion and who's courting whom. You stopped a runaway carriage with your bare hands. That's infinitely more interesting." A knock at the door interrupted them. A young maid entered, red-haired, freckled, perhaps a year or two younger than Carenza, carrying a tray with tea and small sandwiches. "Miss Whitmore? I'm Brinley. I've been assigned as your lady's maid." She bobbed a curtsy, her smile warm and genuine. "I thought you might be hungry. It's been quite a day." Carenza's throat tightened unexpectedly. The gesture was so simple, so thoughtful, yet no one had brought her tea on a tray since she couldn't remember when. "Thank you, Brinley. That's very kind." The maid set down the tray with careful precision. "Lady Tamsin mentioned you'd need dresses. The modiste is being summoned for tomorrow morning. In the meantime, we've found a few things that should fit. They belonged to the late Duchess, God rest her. Her grace was about your size." "The late Duchess?" Carenza glanced at Tamsin, who had gone slightly subdued. "Our mother." Tamsin's voice softened. "She died when I was born. Arden barely remembers her. Father kept everything. Her dresses, her jewels, all of it. He couldn't bear to let any of it go. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Don't apologize." Tamsin's brightness returned, though Carenza could see the effort behind it. She would have wanted her things used. Father would have wanted that too. "Your father?" "Died 8 months ago. Fever. Very sudden." Tamsin smoothed a wrinkle in the bedspread, not meeting Carenza's eyes. "That's why grandmother is so insistent about Arden marrying. The title needs an heir, and Arden isn't getting any younger, and apparently I don't count because I'm merely a daughter." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable. Carenza felt a pang of recognition, the frustration of being overlooked, of being deemed less valuable simply by accident of birth. "I'm sorry," she said again, because what else could she say? "Don't be. It's simply how the world works." Tamsin rose from the bed with renewed energy. "But enough melancholy. You should rest. Tomorrow is going to be exhausting. Fittings, planning, probably a lecture from grandmother. You'll need your strength." She departed before Carenza could respond, leaving her alone with Brinley and the overwhelming silence of her new reality. "Shall I help you undress, miss?" Brinley asked. "There's a nightgown laid out, and I can draw a bath if you'd like. I think I can manage, but thank you." Brinley nodded, unsurprised. "Ring if you need anything, miss. I'm just down the hall." After she left, Carenza sank onto the edge of the bed, that impossibly soft, impossibly luxurious bed, and tried to steady her breathing. What had she done? This morning, she'd been carrying ribbons to her mother's shop, calculating whether they could afford meat this week or would have to make do with potatoes again. Now she sat in a duke's house, wearing a dead duchess's borrowed clothes, preparing to pretend to be engaged to a man she'd met mere hours ago. It was madness. Absolute, complete madness. And yet, she looked around the room again. The flowers, the silk, the sunlight streaming through those magnificent windows. For the first time in years, she wasn't worried about money, wasn't calculating pennies and skipped meals, wasn't lying awake wondering how they'd survive the winter. For 3 months, she could simply exist. The thought was terrifying, and intoxicating, and dangerous in ways she couldn't fully articulate. She thought of her mother, alone in their cramped rooms, probably worried sick by now. She needed to send word. Tomorrow she'd insist on it. She thought of the Duke, Arden, his sister had called him, with his frost-colored eyes and his careful intensity. He'd looked at her like she was a problem to be solved, but also like she was something else, something he hadn't expected to find. She thought of Tamsin, all warmth and enthusiasm, masking grief she hadn't fully processed. She thought of the Dowager, cold and assessing, clearly unhappy about this arrangement. And she thought about Lady Seraphine Cartwright, the woman the Duke was supposed to marry, the woman Carenza was now standing in the way of. She hadn't even met Lady Seraphine yet, and already she dreaded it. Sleep, she told herself. Whatever tomorrow brings, you'll face it better rested. She changed into the borrowed nightgown, finer than anything she'd ever owned, and climbed into the impossible bed. The sheets were cool and smooth, the pillows soft as clouds. She should have felt comforted, safe, lucky. Instead, she lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering what price she'd eventually pay for this borrowed dream. Morning arrived with pale light and quiet footsteps. Brinley appeared with tea and toast, helped Carenza into a borrowed morning dress of soft gray muslin, and arranged her hair in a simple but elegant style that made her look like someone she didn't quite recognize. "The Dowager has requested your presence in the morning room," Brinley said, her voice carefully neutral. "At your earliest convenience," which meant now, which meant immediately, which meant Carenza had approximately 3 minutes to prepare for battle. She found the morning room by following a footman through halls that seemed designed to intimidate. Vaulted ceilings, priceless artwork, carpet so thick her feet made no sound. The Dowager Duchess sat by a window, sunlight catching the silver in her hair, embroidery untouched in her lap. "Miss Whitmore." She didn't rise, didn't smile, didn't offer tea. "Close the door." Carenza obeyed, her pulse racing. "Sit." She sat. For a long moment, the Dowager simply looked at her. The examination was thorough, clinical, taking in the borrowed dress, the carefully arranged hair, the lingering scrapes on her palms. "My grandson tells me you've agreed to assist him in avoiding his responsibilities," the Dowager said finally. "He told me you were trying to force him into a marriage he doesn't want." "Ah." Emotion surfaced briefly in the older woman's eyes. "You're direct, either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which." "Perhaps both, Your Grace." The Dowager's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Whitmore. The truth, this time. Not whatever pretty story my grandson has concocted for public consumption." Carenza considered lying, considered deflecting, evading, protecting herself with half-truths and misdirection. But something in the Dowager's gaze told her it would be pointless. This woman had survived decades in a world that destroyed the weak. She would see through any deception instantly. So Carenza told the truth. She spoke of her father, the farrier who died when she was 12, leaving them with nothing but debts and a cramped room above a stable. Of her mother, who'd turned her skill with a needle into a mending business that barely kept them fed. of years spent watching other girls her age married off while she patched their torn hems for pennies, of dreams she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten they existed. The dowager listened without interruption. Her expression revealed nothing. When Carriage finally finished, silence hung between them like smoke. "So," the dowager said flatly, "you're poor, gently bred, but poor. No connections, no fortune, and no prospects beyond whatever position you might secure as a governess. Yes, Your Grace. And my grandson offered you a fantasy, a few months of luxury in exchange for play acting as his potential bride." That's an accurate summary. The dowager leaned forward. "Let me tell you what will happen, Miss Whitmore. You'll spend the next few months at balls and parties, wearing beautiful dresses and dancing with lords. Arden will be attentive in public and distant in private, because that's who he is, controlled, careful, and emotionally unavailable. You'll start to believe the fantasy. You'll start to hope that maybe, somehow, it could be real." Carence's chest constricted, but she kept her voice steady. "I'm not naive enough to confuse performance with reality. Everyone is that naive when the performance is good enough." The dowager stood, moving to the window. "My concern is not for you, girl. You'll survive. You're clever and adaptable, and Tamsin will ensure you land on your feet. My concern is for Arden." That was not what Carriage expected. "Your Grace, my son died 8 months ago." The dowager's voice held no emotion, but her knuckles were white where they gripped the window frame. "A sudden illness. Arden was in Scotland on estate business. He didn't make it back in time to say goodbye. He's been somewhere else ever since, performing his duties, managing the estates, attending Parliament. But not here. Not really here." Carriage didn't know what to say. "I want him to marry," the dowager continued. "Not because it's his duty, though it is. Not because he needs an heir, though he does. I want him to marry because I want him to live again, to feel something beyond duty and grief. Lady Seraphine is suitable, yes, but she's also vapid and self-absorbed. She'd bore him within a month." "Then why push the match?" "Because he won't choose for himself. He'll bury himself in account books and estate improvements until he's 40 and alone, and then wonder why life feels empty." The dowager turned, her gaze sharp. "You, Miss Whitmore, are a disruption, an unknown variable. You might bore him just as thoroughly as Lady Seraphine would. Or you might surprise me." Carriage stood, meeting the older woman's eyes. "I'm not trying to trap your grandson into marriage, Your Grace. This is a business arrangement, nothing more." "We'll see." The dowager moved toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. If you hurt him, if you manipulate him, or try to exploit his grief, I will destroy you. I don't care how sympathetic your circumstances are. Do we understand each other?" "Perfectly, Your Grace." The dowager nodded and left the room, leaving Carriage alone with her racing thoughts and the unsettling realization that she'd just been given both a warning and a benediction. She was still standing there, trying to process the conversation, when Tamsin rushed in. "She likes you." Tamsin grabbed her hands, spinning her in an excited circle. "I can tell. She only threatens people she respects. This is perfect." Carriage wasn't sure perfect was the right word, but she let Tamsin pull her toward the door, chattering about dress fittings and afternoon calls. Behind them, through the window, she could see Arden in the garden. He stood very still, hands clasped behind his back, staring at nothing. Performing his duties, the dowager had said, but not really here. Carriage wondered suddenly what it would take to make him present, to crack through that controlled facade and find the man underneath. Then she pushed the thought away. This was temporary, a performance. Nothing more. She repeated it like a prayer as Tamsin dragged her toward the waiting carriage. Nothing more. The days that followed blurred together in a whirlwind of fittings, lessons, and carefully orchestrated appearances. Madame Fontaine, the modiste, descended upon Aldridge House with an army of assistants and enough fabric to clothe a small village. She measured and pinned and tutted over Carence's figure with the clinical detachment of a surgeon, declaring her acceptably proportioned and salvageable with the right construction. Tamsin found this hilarious. Carence found it exhausting, but the dresses that emerged were unlike anything she'd ever worn. Silk and satin and velvet in colors she'd only dreamed of. Deep emerald, midnight blue, champagne gold, rose pink. Each one fitted to her body like a second skin, transforming her from a mending girl into someone who looked like she belonged. "You're stunning," Tamsin declared, watching Carenza turn before the mirror in a gown of deep burgundy. "Arden is going to swallow his tongue. Your brother barely looks at me." "My brother barely looks at anyone. That's how you know he's paying attention. He pretends he isn't." Tamsin flopped onto a settee with characteristic gracelessness. "He's been watching you, though, at meals, when you're not looking." Carence's cheeks warmed. "You're imagining things." "I'm observant. There's a difference." The dancing lessons were worse than the fittings. A stern Frenchwoman named Madame Arquette drilled Carence on waltzes, quadrilles, and country dances until her feet ached and her head spun with counts and patterns. "No, no, no!" Madame Arquette would cry, rapping her cane against the floor. "You move like a cart horse. Lighter, lighter." But slowly, painfully, Carenza improved. Her body learned the rhythms. Her feet found the steps. And when she finally completed an entire waltz without stumbling, Madame Arquette gave her the highest possible praise. Acceptable. Through it all, the Duke remained distant. He appeared at meals, perfectly polite and perfectly remote. He inquired about her lessons with formal courtesy. He approved her wardrobe choices with brief nods. But he never lingered, never sought her company, never looked at her the way Tamsin claimed. Until the fifth evening, Carenza had escaped to the library after dinner, seeking refuge among the books. She'd discovered it on her second day. A vast room lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes, smelling of paper and age, and something indefinably comforting. It had become her sanctuary. She was curled in a window seat, watching rain streak the glass, when she heard the door open. The Duke entered, then stopped when he saw her. "Miss Whitmore, I didn't realize anyone was here. I can leave." "No." The word came out sharper than he apparently intended. He softened it with a half gesture toward the shelves. "This room has always been meant for sharing. My father believed books were wasted unless they were read." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was." Arden moved to a shelf near the fireplace, running his fingers along the spines with familiar ease. "This was his favorite room. He spent hours here, reading to Tamsin and me when we were children. Philosophy, poetry, adventure stories. Anything he thought might spark our imaginations." Carenza set down her own book. "What was he like? Your father?" The Duke was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost some of its careful control. Warm, passionate. He felt everything deeply. Joy, sorrow, anger, love. My grandmother used to say he had no armor, that he walked through the world with his heart exposed. He pulled down a slim volume, turning it over in his hands. She meant it as a criticism. He considered it a compliment. "And you?" "I'm nothing like him." The words were flat, final. "I learned early that feeling things deeply was dangerous. It makes you vulnerable. It gives others power over you." "That sounds lonely." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the careful mask slipped. She saw the grief underneath, raw and deep and barely contained. It is. They stood in silence, the rain pattering against the windows, the fire crackling in the hearth. Then Arden crossed to her, holding out the book in his hands. "For you," he said. "I noticed you've been reading poetry. Tennyson, mostly. This is different. Meredith, less famous, but I think you might appreciate him." Carriage took the book carefully. It was old, the leather worn soft with handling, the pages gilt-edged and beautiful. "I can't accept this. It must be valuable." "It's a book. Books are meant to be read, not preserved as relics." He paused. "Besides, you saved my life. A volume of poetry seems inadequate compensation, but it's a start." She opened the cover and found an inscription on the first page, written in a careful hand. "To Arden, on your 16th birthday. May you always find truth in beauty and beauty in truth. Your loving father." "This was a gift from your father," she said softly. "You can't give this away." "I'm not giving it away. I'm lending it to someone who will appreciate it." His voice gentled. "He would have liked you, I think. You have the same quality he admired. That willingness to charge headlong into danger without counting the cost. That's recklessness, not courage. Sometimes they're the same thing." She looked up at him, really looked, and saw something she hadn't noticed before. Beneath the control, beneath the distance, there was warmth, a capacity for feeling that he kept locked away, afraid of what it might cost him. "Thank you," she said, "for the book, and for this." "For what?" "For letting me see you, even just a little." His gaze softened, surprise evident in the slight parting of his lips. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, something important. Instead, he stepped back, composure sliding back into place. "Good night, Miss Whitmore. Enjoy the poetry." He left before she could respond, but he paused at the door, glancing back at her one last time. And in that glance, she saw what Tamsin had noticed, what she'd been too busy surviving to recognize. He was watching her, and she was beginning to understand why. The next few days brought more lessons, more fittings, and, increasingly, more stolen moments. They met in the library each evening, ostensibly by accident. They discussed books, poetry, and philosophy. He told her about his father's death, the sudden illness, the frantic ride from Scotland, the arrival hours too late. She told him about her own father, the way his absence had shaped everything that followed. They didn't touch. They barely stood close enough to feel each other's warmth, but something was building between them, a current, an awareness, a pull that grew stronger with each conversation. "The Hatherley ball is tomorrow," Arden said one evening, breaking a comfortable silence. "Our first public appearance as an engaged couple." "Pretending to be engaged," Carriage corrected. "Of course." But his eyes lingered on her face. "You'll dance the first waltz with me, and the supper dance. Beyond that, you're free to enjoy yourself." "What about Lady Seraphine?" His expression cooled. "She'll be there, with her mother. They're persistent. Should I be worried?" "About Seraphine?" He considered. "She's not cruel, exactly, but she's been raised to believe she deserves what she wants, and she's decided she wants to be a duchess. That's not an answer. No." He met her eyes. "Just be yourself, Miss Whitmore. That's enough." It wasn't a compliment exactly, but it felt like one. And as she lay awake that night, the borrowed book of poetry pressed against her chest, Carriage realized something terrifying. She wasn't pretending anymore. The feeling stirring inside her, the flutter when he entered a room, the ache when he left, the desperate desire to crack through his careful control and find the man underneath. Those were real. This was supposed to be an arrangement, a transaction, a temporary escape from a life she'd never chosen. But somewhere along the way, it had become something else, something dangerous, something that would hurt far worse when it ended. The Hatherley Ball was a glittering spectacle of silk, candlelight, and barely concealed judgment. Carenza descended the grand staircase on Arden's arm, wearing a gown of deep sapphire that Madame Fontaine had pronounced her masterpiece. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate arrangement threaded with tiny crystals that caught the light like scattered stars. She looked, Tamsin had declared, like a dream given form. She felt like a fraud preparing for execution. "Breathe," Arden murmured as they approached the ballroom doors. "You belong here tonight." "I don't." "Then pretend you do. You're good at pretending." The doors opened, and they were announced. "The Duke of Aldridge and Miss Carenza Whitmore." Every head turned. Every conversation paused. Every eye in the room fixed upon them with hungry curiosity. Carenza lifted her chin and walked forward, as if she'd been doing this her entire life. The whispers started immediately, a susurrus of speculation that followed them across the ballroom like a shadow. She caught fragments as they passed. "The one who stopped the carriage." "Farrier's daughter. Can you imagine?" "Rather pretty, I suppose, if you overlook." Arden's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her arm, a warning, or perhaps support. They made their way through the crowd, stopping to exchange pleasantries with lords and ladies whose names Carenza immediately forgot. She smiled until her face ached. She curtsied until her knees protested. She said, "How lovely to meet you," so many times the words lost all meaning. And then Lady Seraphine Cartwright appeared. She was beautiful. Carenza had to admit that. Pale blonde hair arranged in perfect ringlets, porcelain skin, and a gown of rose silk that probably cost more than Carenza's mother earned in a year. She moved through the crowd like a queen, her smile sharp and confident. "Your Grace." She curtsied to Arden with practiced elegance, then turned her attention to Carenza. "And you must be Miss Whitmore. I've heard so much about you." "Lady Seraphine." Carenza curtsied in return, grateful for Madame Arquette's relentless drilling. "The pleasure is mine." "Is it?" Seraphine's smile didn't falter, but her eyes were cold. "How charming. You know, when I heard about your little adventure with the carriage, I simply couldn't believe it. Such bravery. Most young ladies would have fled. Most young ladies weren't raised around horses." "Ah, yes, the farrier's daughter." Seraphine said it pleasantly, but the barb was unmistakable. "How fortunate that your rustic upbringing proved useful." "Seraphine." Arden's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I believe the orchestra is starting. Miss Whitmore promised me the first waltz." "Of course." Seraphine's smile tightened. "I wouldn't dream of interfering with your arrangement." She glided away before Carenza could respond, leaving the word arrangement hanging in the air like an accusation. "She knows," Carenza said quietly, as Arden led her toward the dance floor. "She suspects. There's a difference." His hand found her waist, guiding her into position. "Don't let her unsettle you. That's exactly what she wants." The music began, and they moved. This was different from practicing with Madame Arquette, different from counting steps in the empty ballroom of Aldridge House. This was real, his hand warm against her back, his eyes holding hers, the entire room watching them turn across the polished floor. "You're counting," he observed. "I'm trying not to fall. Don't think about the steps. Think about me." She looked up at him, really looked, and something shifted. The crowded room faded. The watching eyes disappeared. There was only Arden, close enough to feel his warmth, guiding her through the dance with effortless grace. "Better," he murmured. "Much better." They didn't speak for the remainder of the waltz, They didn't need to. Something was passing between them. An awareness, a tension, a pull that had nothing to do with performance. When the music ended, she didn't want to let go. He didn't seem to want her to. "The terrace," he said, his voice rough. "I need air. Will you join me?" The heat in his eyes, the barely controlled intensity in his voice. She couldn't walk away from that. Yes. The terrace was cooler, quieter, lit only by the glow spilling from the ballroom windows. Other couples strolled the gardens below, but up here they were momentarily alone. "You did well tonight," Arden said, leaning against the stone balustrade. "Better than well. You were magnificent." I was terrified. It didn't show. He turned to face her, and in the dim light his expression had lost some of its careful control. Carenza, her first name. He'd never used it before. "When I first proposed this arrangement," he continued, "I thought it would be simple. A performance, nothing more. But these past days," he stopped, his expression hardening with restraint. "I find myself thinking about you constantly. Your laugh, your stubbornness, the way you refuse to be intimidated by anything, even when you should be. Arden, tell me I'm imagining this." His voice dropped to something raw and desperate. "Tell me this is still just pretense, and I'll accept it. I'll bury whatever this is and never speak of it again. But if there's any chance, any possibility, that you feel what I feel—" "I do." The words escaped before she could stop them. "I've been trying not to, but I do." He moved toward her, and she thought, hoped, feared that he was going to kiss her. "Well, well." The voice came from the doorway. Lady Seraphine stood there, silhouetted against the ballroom light, her smile triumphant. "This is Cozy, the Duke of Aldrich, and his little farrier's daughter, hiding on terraces. People will talk." "Let them." Arden's voice was ice. "Oh, I intend to." Seraphine stepped closer, her eyes fixed on Carenza. "Did you really think no one would notice? A nobody appearing out of nowhere, suddenly engaged to one of the most eligible men in England? It's obvious what you are. And what am I? A fortune hunter, a schemer, a desperate girl who saw an opportunity and seized it." Seraphine's smile sharpened. "But schemes unravel, Miss Whitmore, and when this one does, when everyone sees you for what you truly are, I'll be there to comfort His Grace through his disappointment." She returned to the ballroom before either of them could respond. Carenza's hands were shaking. "She's going to destroy me." "She's going to try." Arden's hand closed over hers, steadying. "But she won't succeed. I won't let her. You might not have a choice. There's always a choice." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss against her knuckles. "Trust me, Carenza. Whatever comes next, we face it together." She wanted to believe him, desperately, foolishly, completely. But as they returned to the ballroom, as she endured the remaining hours of sidelong glances and whispered speculation, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had been set in motion. Something that would break them both before it was through. The days following the Hatherley ball were a siege. Seraphine hadn't been idle. Rumors spread through London like wildfire, each one more damaging than the last. Miss Whitmore was a fraud, a manipulator, a girl with loose morals who had seduced the grieving Duke. The story of the Carriage rescue was exaggerated, perhaps even fabricated. She was unworthy of his attention, his home, his name. Carenza saw the effects everywhere. The looks that had been curious were now hostile. Ladies who had been polite now turned their backs. Invitations to Aldrich House dried up. Even the servants whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. And through it all, the Dowager watched with cold, assessing eyes. "You must respond," Tamsin urged, after a particularly brutal morning of stares and snubs during a promenade in Hyde Park. "Say something. Defend yourself." "What defense do I have?" Carence's voice was hollow. "Everything she's saying is true. I am a farrier's daughter. I did appear out of nowhere. This is an arrangement." "But you love him. That's not pretense." Love. The word landed like a blow. Did she love him? She'd been so careful not to name the feeling, as if refusing to acknowledge it might keep it contained. But Tamsin's casual certainty cracked something open, and the truth came flooding through. Yes, she loved him, and it was going to destroy her. That evening, the dowager summoned her to the morning room. "Sit," the older woman commanded. No pleasantries, no pretense of warmth. Carence sat. "I warned you," the dowager said, her voice like winter. "I told you this would happen. A girl of your station, thrust into our world. Did you really think society would accept you without consequence? I knew there would be challenges." "Challenges," the dowager laughed, though there was no humor in it. "You've become a liability. Every whisper about you reflects on this family, on Arden, on Tamsin, on 400 years of Aldridge reputation. I never asked for this. No, you simply seized an opportunity when it presented itself." The dowager's eyes were pitiless. "And now you must decide whether you love my grandson enough to let him go." The words hit like a physical blow. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Lady Seraphine has offered a solution. If you disappear quietly, return to your mother's shop, claim the engagement was a misunderstanding. She's agreed to cease her campaign. The rumors will fade. Arden's reputation will recover. He can marry someone suitable and forget this unfortunate episode ever occurred. You want me to leave. I want what's best for this family." The dowager's voice softened fractionally. "And I'm asking you to consider whether staying is truly what's best for him." Carence wanted to argue, wanted to fight, wanted to declare that love was enough, that they could weather any storm together. But she thought of Arden's face during the ball, the way the whispers had followed him, the strain in his shoulders, the tension in his posture. She was hurting him simply by existing. "I'll go," she heard herself say, "tonight, before he can try to stop me." The dowager's expression flickered, something that might have been regret, quickly suppressed. "You're making the right choice." "Am I?" Carence stood, her legs unsteady. "Or am I simply making your choice?" She didn't wait for an answer. Packing took less than an hour. She left the beautiful dresses, the crystals, the accessories. She kept only the gray muslin she'd arrived in, and the book of poetry Arden had given her, the one inscribed by his father. She wrote 2 letters, one to Tamsin, brief and apologetic, one to Arden. The second letter took 7 attempts. "Your Grace, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please don't try to find me. What we shared was real, at least for me. But reality isn't enough when the world is determined to destroy it. You have responsibilities, obligations, a future I could never fit into. I refuse to be the anchor that drags you under. Marry someone worthy of you. Be happy, even if it's not with me. Thank you for letting me see you, even just a little. I'll carry that gift forever. Yours in gratitude, Carence." She sealed the letter and left it on her writing desk. The carriage she'd arranged was waiting at the servants' entrance. A shabby hired vehicle, nothing like the sleek equipages of Aldridge House. She climbed inside without looking back. The journey to Crofters Lane took less than an hour, but it felt like crossing between worlds. The grand houses gave way to modest shops, then cramped tenements, then the familiar narrow street where her mother's mending shop crouched beneath a faded sign. Home. It should have felt like refuge. Instead, it felt like a cage she'd briefly escaped, only to be locked inside once more. Her mother met her at the door, eyes wide with surprise and concern. Carenza, what are you doing here? What's happened? It's over, Carenza said, and burst into tears. 3 days passed in a gray blur of mending and misery. Carenza fell back into her old routines, stitching torn hems, replacing buttons, letting out seams for women whose lives hadn't exploded into chaos. Her mother asked gentle questions that Carenza deflected with half-truths. The neighbors whispered, but they'd always whispered. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. She thought about Arden constantly. His voice, his rare smiles, the way he'd looked at her on the terrace, like she was something precious. She imagined him reading her letter, his expression going cold and distant. She imagined him moving on, marrying Seraphine, and forgetting her entirely. Each imagining was a small death. On the 4th day, her mother sat her down at the cramped kitchen table. Enough. Carenza looked up from the shirt she was mending. Enough what? Enough hiding. Enough pretending you're fine when anyone with eyes can see you're broken. Her mother's voice was gentle but firm. Tell me what happened. Really happened. So Carenza told her. Everything. The carriage, the Duke, the arrangement, the growing feelings she'd tried so hard to suppress, the ball, Seraphine's cruelty, the dowager's ultimatum, the choice she'd made because she thought it was right. When she finished, her mother was quiet for a long moment. You left, she said finally, because you were afraid. I left because I was destroying him. You left because you were afraid, her mother repeated. Afraid that you weren't enough, that he'd eventually realize his mistake, that the world's judgment was more powerful than his love. It is. You didn't see how they looked at me. I've seen how the world looks at women like us my whole life. Her mother's hand covered hers. But I've also seen something else. I've seen your father choose me over his family's objections. I've seen love survive poverty and loss, and every obstacle life could throw at it. Father's family wasn't the aristocracy. No, but they thought we weren't worthy, just as these fine lords and ladies think you're not worthy. Her mother's eyes were fierce. They were wrong then. They're wrong now. It doesn't matter. It's over. Is it? Her mother stood, moving to the window. A man doesn't give a woman his father's books unless she matters to him. A man doesn't look at a woman the way you described unless he loves her. Even if he does, love isn't enough. Love is everything. Her mother turned back to face her. I watched you come home from that house, Carenza. I saw your face. You're not heartbroken because you lost a position or an opportunity. You're heartbroken because you lost him, and if you let fear keep you from fighting for that, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Carenza wanted to argue, but her mother's words struck something deep, a truth she'd been running from since the moment she fled Aldridge House. She hadn't left because it was right. She'd left because she was terrified. A knock sounded at the door. Her mother answered it and stepped back, surprise flickering across her face. Piers Wyndham stood on the threshold, a well-dressed man with sharp eyes and an unreadable expression. Carenza had seen him at Aldridge House, hovering on the edges, handling quiet arrangements for the Duke. Miss Whitmore. He held out a sealed letter. From His Grace. He asked me to deliver it personally. Carenza's breath caught. He also asked me to tell you something. Piers met her eyes. He said, I'm not giving up. Come back, please. She took the letter with trembling hands, and somewhere beneath the fear, hope flickered back to life. The letter was brief. 3 sentences. The Dowager had no authority to send you away. I never agreed to let you go. Come home. Not to Aldridge House, not to their arrangement. Home. The word broke something inside her, or perhaps rebuilt something that had been shattered. Go, her mother said softly. Fight for him. What if I'm not enough? Then at least you'll know you tried. Her mother kissed her forehead. But darling, I think you're more than enough. You just need to believe it. The journey back to Mayfair felt endless. Piers had brought a carriage, a proper one this time, with the Aldridge crest on the door. The servants would have seen it arrive at Crofters Lane. The neighbors would gossip for weeks. Carenza didn't care. When she arrived at Aldridge House, she didn't wait for the footman to announce her. She moved through the doors, past the startled servants, heading directly for the library, the place where everything between them had truly begun. He was there. Standing by the window, staring out at the gardens, his posture rigid with tension. He turned when he heard the door, and the look on his face, hope and fear and desperate longing, stole her breath. You came back. You asked me to. She stopped a few feet away, trembling. Your letter. Forget the letter. He crossed to her in 3 strides, stopping just short of touching her. Tell me why you left. The real reason. Because your grandmother said. My grandmother had no right. His voice was rough with barely controlled emotion. She acted without my knowledge or consent. When I found your letter, when I realized what she'd done. He broke off, jaw working. I nearly tore this house apart. She was protecting you, protecting your reputation. I don't care about my reputation. He stepped closer, near enough that she could feel the heat of him. I care about you, only you. Arden. Let me finish. His hands rose to cup her face, gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. When my father died, I shut myself away. I built walls so high nothing could touch me. Not grief, not joy, not love. I thought if I didn't feel anything, I couldn't be hurt. That sounds exhausting. It was. And then you appeared. His thumb traced her cheekbone. You charged into a runaway carriage and my carefully controlled world, and you demolished every wall I'd built. You made me feel things I'd sworn never to feel again. I didn't mean to. I know. That's what makes it real. He rested his forehead against hers, breathing unsteadily. I love you, Carenza. Not because you saved my life. Not because of any arrangement. I love you because you're brave and stubborn and brilliant. And when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be alive. Her eyes burned with tears. I love you too. I tried not to. I told myself it was foolish and dangerous and doomed. It's all of those things. He smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his entire face. But I don't care. I'd rather have one moment of loving you than a lifetime of safe emptiness. He kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry. A kiss that contained everything they'd both been holding back. She clung to him, tears streaming down her face, feeling something inside her click into place like a key turning in a lock. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the library door opened. The dowager stood in the threshold, Tamsin hovering behind her. The older woman's expression was unreadable as she took in the scene, her grandson and the farrier's daughter wrapped in each other's arms. So, she said, you came back. Carenza stepped away from Arden, but he caught her hand before she could retreat. She came back, he said evenly, and she's staying, unless you'd like to try removing her again. Arden. No. His voice hardened. You overstepped, grandmother. You had no right to drive her away. I was protecting this family. You were protecting tradition, expectation, the opinions of people who don't matter. He pulled Carenza closer. This woman saved my life. More than that, she gave me a reason to live it. I won't lose her again. The dowager's gaze shifted to Carenza. And you? Are you prepared for what this means? The scrutiny, the judgment, the endless battle to prove yourself worthy. I've been proving myself my whole life." Carenza met her gaze directly. "I don't intend to stop now." Silence stretched between them. Then, impossibly, the dowager smiled. "Good." She turned to her grandson. "If you're going to defy me, at least you've chosen someone with spine." She moved toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "The Stanmore ball is tomorrow evening. I suggest you announce the engagement properly this time. With my blessing." She disappeared, leaving stunned silence in her wake. "Did she just—" Carenza started. "Accept you, apparently." Arden laughed, a sound of pure relief. "I told you, you're extraordinary." Tamsin flew across the room and embraced them both. "Finally," she declared. "Now, can we please plan a wedding?" The Stanmore Ball was the most anticipated event of the season. And now, thanks to whispers that spread faster than wildfire, it would be the scene of the Duke of Aldridge's official engagement announcement. Carenza stood at the top of the grand staircase, wearing a gown of liquid gold that caught the candlelight like captured sunshine. Madame Fontaine had outdone herself. The dress was magnificent, but more than that, it was armor. "Ready?" Arden asked, offering his arm. "Terrified," she admitted. "Good. Terror means you're paying attention," he smiled down at her. "But this time, we're terrified together." They descended the stairs as a murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Lady Seraphine was there, her face pale with fury. The dowager stood near the refreshment table, watching with sharp eyes. Tamsin bounced on her heels near the orchestra, barely containing her excitement. And then Arden stopped in the center of the ballroom. The music fell silent. Every eye turned toward them. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arden said, his voice carrying across the vast room, "I have an announcement." Carenza's pulse thrummed against her throat. "Some of you know Miss Carenza Whitmore as the woman who stopped a runaway carriage and saved my life. What you don't know is that in the week since, she has done something far more remarkable." He turned to face her, his eyes bright with emotion. "She has reminded me that there is more to life than duty, more to love than propriety, more to courage than birth or breeding." A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Miss Whitmore isn't highborn. She isn't wealthy. She isn't by society's measure suitable." His voice hardened. "But society's measure is wrong, and I refuse to let it dictate my happiness any longer." He dropped to one knee. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs, but Carenza barely heard them. She saw only Arden, his face open and vulnerable, his eyes holding hers with absolute certainty. "Carenza Whitmore," he said, "you charged into my life and saved me in ways you don't even understand. You made me brave enough to choose. Will you honor me, honor us, by becoming my wife?" The question hung in the air like a held breath. She thought of everything that had brought her here: the runaway carriage, the impossible arrangement, the falling, and the fear, and the finding. She thought of her mother's words: "Love is everything." "Yes," she said, her voice clear and strong. 1,000 times. "Yes." He rose and kissed her. Right there, in front of everyone, scandalous and perfect and absolutely right. The applause started slowly, then built. Not everyone was clapping. Lady Seraphine had already departed the room, and several matrons looked appalled. But enough were. Enough believed. Enough saw what they had, and recognized it as real. The dowager approached as the crowd dispersed into excited conversation. "Well," she said, studying Carenza with those piercing eyes, "you've caused quite the stir. I seem to be good at that." "Yes, you do." The dowager's lips curved. Not quite a smile, but something close. "My son would have approved. He always said the best things in life come from unexpected places." She moved away before Carriage could respond, but the words settled around her like a benediction. 6 months later, the wedding was the talk of London, not for its scandal, but for its joy. Carriage walked down the aisle of St. George's Church, her mother weeping in the front pew. The gown was her own design, ivory silk, elegant and simple. Tamsin served as her attendant, practically vibrating with happiness. And at the altar, Arden waited, the man who had started as an arrangement and become her entire world. After the ceremony, after the celebration, after the endless toasts and dances, they slipped away to the library of Aldridge House, their library now. "I have something for you," Arden said, pulling a wrapped package from his desk. Carriage opened it to find a leather-bound journal, empty and waiting. "For our story," he explained. "I thought perhaps you might want to write it down, how we began, what we survived, where we're going." She traced the embossed cover, tears pricking her eyes. "It's perfect. There's one more thing." He reached into his pocket and produced a folded letter. "I found this in my father's study, addressed to whoever Arden chooses. He wrote it before he died." Her hands trembled as she opened it. "To the woman who has captured my son's heart. If you're reading this, you've done something I spent years hoping someone would do. You've cracked through his armor and found the man underneath. Arden will try to protect you by pushing you away. He will mistake duty for love and fear for caution. Be patient with him. Love him anyway. And know this, you are not an intruder in our family. You are its continuation, its future, its hope. Welcome home. Marcus Aldridge, Duke of Aldridge." Carriage couldn't speak. The tears came freely now, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming gratitude. "He knew," she whispered. "Somehow, he knew. He knew me." Arden pulled her close, pressing his lips to her hair. "And now you know me too, better than anyone." She looked up at him, her husband, her partner, her home. "I love you," she said. "I love you too." He smiled, and it was like watching the sun emerge from behind clouds. Now, and always. Years later, on the anniversary of their engagement, Carriage and Arden attended the Hatherley Ball, the same ball where everything had almost fallen apart. They danced every dance together. They laughed at whispered jokes. They ignored the occasional raised eyebrow from those who still couldn't accept that a farrier's daughter had become a duchess. And when the evening ended, they stood on the same terrace where he'd first told her he loved her. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, leaning against his shoulder. "Choosing me?" "Every day," he said solemnly. She laughed and swatted his arm. "I regret every day that passed before I found you," he continued, pulling her close, "but not a single moment since." She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of everything they'd built together. And somewhere, she was certain, his father smiled.